What's up, guys, and welcome to One Take. For those of you watching this live right now, thanks for bearing with me as we work out the technical issues here. And before I get too deep into this, I'm going to look over at my tech guy for confirmation that I'm actually streaming, because we've been trying to get this to work for a little bit of time now. Okay, looks like we are, in fact, live. So what we're going to be doing tonight is a full recap and review of the latest episode of HBO's Watchmen. That's episode 5. Going to be full of spoilers, so if you haven't watched the episode yet, you're going to want to do that before you watch or listen to this video. And by the way, if you're listening to this after it's been broadcast, you should know that this was originally broadcast live. So you're going to want to subscribe to this channel to make sure that next time we're broadcasting, you can be a part of the conversation. But with that, let's jump right into tonight's episode. The moment tonight's episode started, I was immediately excited because we saw the title card telling us that we are in 1985, Hoboken, which means we're right in the midst of when the original graphic novel took place. We see a character. At first, we don't know who it is, but pretty quickly, someone refers to him as Wade, who we know is the Looking Glass. So we're seeing a flashback to him as a child, which gets me even more excited because one of the things I've been saying is I want to get a little bit more of Looking Glass, more of his backstory. So it looks immediately like we're going to get some of that tonight. And I should also point out that we hear on the radio doomsday clock standing at 1 minute till midnight. So we also know that we're probably in the climax of the graphic novel, just as things are heating up, just as people are afraid nuclear bombs are going to be going off any minute. We see that Wade is part of some kind of missionary trip, part of a group of other Christian folks trying to hand out flyers. And a group of punks basically start to pick on him. One of the girls takes him, brings him to a fun house. When they're in there, she starts to basically seduce him, takes all his clothes off, and then runs away, leaves him alone in there naked. While he's in there, he starts to yell at himself. One of the things he says is, "You're a filthy damn sinner. Now you get what you deserve." The whole place starts shaking, and immediately I think to myself, this is the Ozymandias giant squid attack. And we're actually getting to sort of see some of that. So before we get too far into that attack and move on from this point, like I said, I've wanted to get more of the backstory to Looking Glass. One aspect of his character, and I think one of the reasons people tend to compare him to Rorschach, is that he seems like a very principled person, someone who obsessively pursues whatever he believes in. For Rorschach, that seemed to come from some kind of psychologically damaged place, whereas for Looking Glass, it seems like he might have some principle because he was raised to be a religious person. So that was interesting. So like I said, we see things start to shake immediately. If you're a graphic novel reader, then you suspect that this is the Squid Attack. And when Wade grabs his head, I was sure that was the case because we all know that when the squid attacked, there was also a psychic wave that hurt and killed a lot of people. When things calm down, Wade walks out of the funhouse and sees a pile of bodies, one of whom is the girl that seduced him earlier. We get a close-up of her face, and she looks like her brain was severely traumatized. We see a puddle of blood behind her. This whole scene was pretty horrifying, and that gets cranked up when Wade, as a child, starts screaming, "What happened? What happened?" And as it zooms out, there's some of that great synth music we're used to in Watchmen. And here it almost played like 80s horror music. So what a way to open the episode, especially after I know some people were a little on the fence about how they felt about last week's episode here. So here we start off with a bang, and immediately this becomes one of my favorite episodes. And I'm happy to say that by the end, it was still one of my favorite episodes. And Alun, tech guy, I'm looking at you. Just want to say that if you can keep an eye in the chat, let me know if any interesting activities happening there.
I'm on it.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, sir. So going from there, we get to the present day, where we see basically people trying out an advertisement, trying to create a commercial with a theme of come back to New York. We see pretty quickly that this is basically tech guy. Lon, what do you call it when you're like testing? It's a focus group. All right, it didn't need him.
Group.
That's right. Thanks, Lon. So it's basically a focus group to try out a new campaign to get people to move back to New York. It's been 30 years since the Squid Attack. People are still scared. So how do we get them to come back? This group screens a come back to New York commercial. Looking Glass Wade is there. Afterwards, the folks who tried running that commercial, they go through the survey. And afterwards, people all gave positive reactions. They said, oh, I would definitely move back to New York. I would definitely go to New York after seeing that commercial. Great commercial. But right after that, Looking Glass tells them, nah, you're all full of BS. Those people, I was watching them. They said they would move back to New York, but that's because they're afraid to say that they're afraid. They're telling you what you want to hear, and they just don't want to admit. They want to say, will I go back to New York? No, I'm not scared. I will go back to New York. So Looking Glass, basically we learn here, as we all know, all the cops in this world, they need to have a cover story. They can't tell anybody they're a cop, so they have to have a fake occupation. Joshua in the chat says, the whole what happened screaming moment was so cliche. I guess I can kind of see where you're coming from. To me, in the moment, it worked really well. You should just skip to talking about the turn of the screw moment outside the bar. You want me to jump ahead a little bit? We can jump ahead. That's fine, and we'll come back to it. I did have some stuff I want to say about these earlier scenes, but I know we all saw the episode just moments ago, so we're all excited. So Looking Glass is at a support group, right, where he's hanging out with other people that have trauma, some extra dimensional fear, and paranoia from being there when the squid attacked, or some people who weren't even there when the squid attacked. And basically, one of the girls in the support group wants to get to know Looking Glass a little bit more after that support group moment. So he goes to a bar with her. When they leave the bar, basically, she gets in a pickup truck as it drives away. Here is the moment that Joshua is talking about. A leaf of lettuce falls out of the truck. And immediately we all know that's the truck that we saw in episode 1. And this girl is not what she appeared to be. She's part of the 7th Cavalry. So he chases after her. He calls for backup. Supposedly backup is on the way. Then when he follows the truck, he gets to the hangout for the 7th Cavalry. They get out of the truck. They're wearing the Rorschach masks. They go into the hangout. So Looking Glass snoops around a little bit, goes into the truck, finds a gun, does something you should never do. We all know you should never do this, but he goes in alone without backup. And so we had a turn of the screw moment, like Joshua said. Oh, crap, she's part of the 7th Cavalry. But then another turn of the screw moment. We see a ball teleport from above Looking Glass. The first thing I thought of when I saw that is, if you've ever seen the movie The Prestige, there is Tesla experimenting with teleportation technology. And so we see a glimpse of that here. Space Jam. Good call, Joshua. Basketball teleporting. So this looks like we're potentially hinting at a Space Jam crossover here. I'm a sci-fi fan. So anytime this show has alluded to the sci-fi elements that we see in Watchmen, I get excited. So I was loving seeing that in this episode. The other thing that excites me about this episode is, like I said, one of the things I've enjoyed about Watchmen is that it's been mysterious, it's been intriguing, but one of the things it hasn't really done super well for me yet is get me to really care about a character and get emotionally involved. So yes, there's a mystery, but there's also a real sense of danger because I care about this character. So this episode was kind of a good combination of the two. We have teleporting basketballs, and we have Wade, who I care about, and he's wading into a situation that seems like he might be a little bit in over his head. So a basketball teleports in. Wade walks into a room where we see a bunch of 7th Cavalry folks hanging around a teleportation device. Basically looks like a doorway. They're throwing basketballs into it. They see Wade there and they all tell him to basically be cool, Wade. The girl sees him. She very quickly tells him that she lured him there. She set up the lettuce to fall out of the truck. They were the ones on the radio, so he thought he called for backup and he didn't. So he leaps into action. He turns to shoot one of the 7th Cavalry, and immediately nothing happens. She tells him that she put blanks in the gun. One thing I want to say here is that scene, they're doing such a good job of throwing you off kilter. My first thought when the gun didn't work is not that it was blanks, but that he was in a dream or in some kind of, the laws of physics weren't applying. But then I got brought back down to reality that was part of the setup. He pulled that gun out of their truck. He gets brought into another room. They throw him into a chair and basically say, you have to watch this. Another 7th Cavalry member joins him in the room and starts talking. And Wade says, are you even trying to disguise your voice? As soon as he said that, recognized the guy's voice. He takes his mask off, and it is Senator Keene. We all knew there was something up with this guy, and finally we get confirmation that he is somehow involved with the 7th Cavalry. Josh in the chat, the whole HQ teleportation reveal, etc., made the cavalry as a group so much more interesting and dynamic. It's not enough to just have them be racist. That is 100% what I was thinking when I watched this episode. I've been saying for a couple of episodes now that having a group of white supremacists as the villains of this show is interesting in one sense, but when you're in the world of Watchmen, I was expecting this story to be a lot bigger than that, a lot more global. I mean, back in the original Watchmen, we had the doomsday clock. We were literally counting down to potentially the end of the world. So I theorized that the 7th Cavalry were in fact racist. They were villains just like they seemed, but that they were pawns being used for some grander purpose. And perhaps even racial tensions were purposefully being flamed to keep that group as this active group that could be used. And we get confirmation of that here. Senator Keene tells us he came down here and assumed leadership of these idiots to prevent a white night from happening again. He says same as Judd. So it seems, at least from my standpoint, my current theory is that Senator Keene, Judd, Will, they needed an army for some purpose. They needed a group of people for whatever big thing they're planning. There's a bunch of racists here that are all looking to rally around a cause, a lot of very impressionable people. So they decided to take over. Senator Keene says it's to keep the peace. I think it's for a little bit more than that. They need an army, and they're going to be somehow useful in whatever they're doing with those teleportation devices and whatever Lady True is doing with that Millennium Clock. One thing I'll say about the scene that I loved is as Senator Keene and Looking Glass are talking, you have the ball continuing to fall through that portal every once in a while, which just adds to the uneasiness and just overall bizarreness of this whole scene. So they get to within their conversation, Senator Keene and Looking Glass get to a point where Keene basically asks, or they get to the question of what are they doing with their teleportation devices? Looking Glass guesses you're going to open up a portal in Tulsa, drop another squid on us. And that gets to a point that I was a little worried about in a previous episode where it felt a little repetitive. Are we really going to do the whole bring in a global threat to try and rally the world together again? It's too repetitive. And Senator Keene literally tells us, yeah, that would be too repetitive. So don't worry. This show is going to be a little bit more interesting. Josh, again, in the chat, I'm not inclined to root for Wade, who's getting dirty with the cavalry, but it is interesting to see him caught in the middle of them, the police department and his relationship with Angela. Didn't we know that whole V tape, though? So a couple things I'll say in response to that. Number one, I do root for Wade. I see what you're saying where you say he's kind of getting dirty, but that almost makes me feel worse for him. I think one of the things this episode is about trauma. It's about what this overwhelming paranoia does to you. One of the things it does is it paralyzes you. And if you look at Wade as a character, he seems to be somebody that's capable. He's very good at his job. He can tell when you're lying. He's a good interrogator, but we haven't really seen him take any independent action yet. When he's interrogating, he's doing that on behalf of the police, who we are learning are corrupt. When he is investigating those pills, he's doing it for Angela. And now he's acting because the 7th Cavalry are putting the squeeze on him. So throughout this episode, we never really see him take any independent action. We just see him get pushed around. Having seen what he went through as a child and understanding where he's coming from, the fact that he had the religious background and it seems like he is somebody that wants to do good, that makes me feel bad for him. It makes me root for him. And it makes me hope that as he's getting more and more backed into a corner, especially like we saw at the end of the episode, I hope that like an animal in a cage, that's going to finally knock some sense into him and get him to act. That's what I'm hoping we see. And the Veidt tape. So they sit him down, they show him a tape, which is basically Adrian Veidt explaining to President Redford that he was behind the whole Squid Attack. The squid did not come from another dimension. It's something that Veidt put together so the whole world would have a global threat to rally against, thus preventing doomsday. And the interesting thing this show is doing is that it's trying to appease both fans of the graphic novel and people who haven't read the comic or seen the movie and are new to this whole premise. And that's been okay so far, right? They've kind of, just with quick lines of dialogue, have given us little snippets of information. So if you already knew about the squid, for example, it doesn't really bother you. It's in one ear, out the other. This is probably the most overt example where something that Josh, you and I know from reading the graphic novel, it's treated as a big reveal here. But for you and me, we already knew it. It still worked for me though, just because I think the episode did a good job of getting me invested in the character of Wade. So kind of like when you watch a movie you've already seen, but you watch it with someone who hasn't seen it yet, you almost get to re-experience it through that other person. Or it's like watching a reaction video on YouTube. We saw all that. We saw the Veidt tape, information we already knew, but we got to watch Wade react to it. And of all the characters who could watch and react to that video, Wade is the one you want to see because he was so personally and deeply impacted by it. So yes, I agree with you, Josh. We've already seen this, but I thought they actually found a pretty clever way to deliver that information in a way that people who haven't read the book get to learn about it, and people who have read it have a way to sort of re-experience it in an emotionally impactful way. And so the other thing I'll say is last week, one of the things I theorized about for Veidt is that he volunteered to go to this prison. So in this episode, it's confirmed that he's in space. And I've assumed that he originally went to that place, wherever he is, voluntarily. And why would he do that? And my thought is that by now the world hates him because he conjured up this squid monster. So it wouldn't be the worst thing for him to sort of escape. This tape reminds us something I probably should have already known, which is that Veidt, it's not known that Veidt was behind the squid. The public is meant to believe that the squid truly came from another dimension. Having said that, I still think Veidt might have seen it as a good idea to kind of get off Earth or at least go into hiding somewhere, because the president and anybody else who knows he's behind this, he's in a sort of precarious situation because anyone who has that tape has pretty immense leverage over him. Of course, releasing the tape would also sort of destroy Robert Redford's presidency, but it just feels like a good idea to get off planet. Josh in the chat, the support group scene where they talked about genetic trauma, reminiscent of dialogue and research around the African-American experience, still grappling with slavery and segregation. Great point. That whole support group scene worked really well for me. This was probably the most emotional episode for me of Watchmen. And really the main reason why it was my favorite episode of the series so far. Was V texting true? That's a great question. So let's get back to that in a second. Let me quickly recap the Veidt scene. Anytime an episode of Watchmen starts, I sit there and I wait to get to Veidt because that's kind of my favorite part of the episode. of any of these episodes. It's sort of my favorite segment. So we see Veidt. He's in his spacesuit, the one he's been working on for a couple of episodes. He has a few of the clones strap him into a catapult. He's tied to a rope. The catapult launches him into the sky. And to the surprise of, I'm assuming, very few people, we see that, yes, he is in space. He slowly lowers to the ground. In the background, we see the face of Jupiter, which implies to us that, yes, he is on a moon, not necessarily the moon, likely one of the moons of Jupiter. Up there, we see all of the dead Mr. Phillips and Crookshank's clones that he's been launching into space. He starts breaking them into pieces, lays them out to spell, "Save me." He looks up and sees a satellite looking down at him. So, yes, confirmation, his message is at least visible to whoever's looking through that satellite. And then he gets yanked back into whatever artificial environment he's in. The game warden has found him, and he tells him, "You broke the rules. You're under arrest." He makes reference to God, and Veidt essentially yells, "Your God has abandoned you. You're all pathetic," to the game warden, to all the clones. And by the way, close up on the game warden, I believe he's played by the same actor who's playing all the Mr. Phillips clones. So it seems that the game warden may himself be a clone and not some other mysterious, interesting character. Maybe he's just a sort of higher functioning clone. The game warden says, "Our God has left us, and it is unlikely he'll return. No mercy it is." Places him under arrest, and that's the last we see of Veidt in this episode. So back to your question, was Veidt talking to True? So to be honest, when I first saw this, that wasn't my thought. And the reason why is because I have been under the impression that Veidt is being held here by True. The reason I think that is because Veidt disappeared around the same time that True took over his company. Now, that could be coincidence. It could be that Veidt disappeared and that gave True the opportunity to take over his company. I read it as more nefarious. They made some kind of deal that True will put Veidt somewhere far away because Veidt wants to get away. Remember, he did say that he thought the place was a paradise at first, so I'm under the impression that he went there willingly. Not only that, but we saw a lot of parallels between Veidt's situation and the technology that True has. Right? We see that Veidt was able to fill the clones with knowledge, just like we saw True giving her daughter memories from Vietnam. And in this episode, we learn that Will is taking those pills, which are nostalgia pills, which contain memories. So that's number one. Number two, last week's episode opened with Lady True showing that she has some kind of advanced technology that allowed her to create a baby for a couple that weren't able to have children. Just like we see all those fetuses and those babies that Veidt was fishing out of the lake last episode. So that's the second parallel. The third parallel, Veidt seems to be living in some kind of artificial environment, just like Lady True has her artificial Vietnam environment that she lives in. And pause right there. RageNot is back in the chat and he says, hit the like button. Josh already did. Thank you both. I always say everyone who watches these streams are awesome, but you're ever so slightly just a little bit more awesome when you hit that like button, or as RageNot likes to say, smash that like button. And then also subscribe to the channel and hit the little bell icon to make sure you get more notifications whenever we make more videos like this one. But continuing on. So I've been under the impression that Lady True is the one holding Veidt captive. So it wouldn't make sense to me that he would be sending the save me message to Lady True. But Josh, you asking that question does make me wonder if maybe Lady True was in the know. She was in the loop about Veidt going away. Maybe she thought he was going to a paradise, but Veidt is realizing that he was wrong. Lady True was wrong. So maybe he is sending her the message saying, hey, Lady True, we thought this place was great. I was wrong. Get me the hell out of here. Which I think sends us all back to theory number one, which is that for some reason, Dr. Manhattan is the one holding him here. That seems strange to me. It seems like Dr. Manhattan wouldn't want to get involved in the kind of goings on of the human race, but it's been about 30 years since that graphic novel, so maybe something's happened that pulled him back in. V is hilariously eccentric. This is Josh in the chat. Maybe he was calling Miss Frizzle for an Uber ride. Y'all remember the Moon episode of Magical School Bus? And then was the warden a clone? So I do believe the warden was a clone. And I don't think I've seen that episode of Magical School Bus. But you know what? That theory is as good as any. So we can go with that. And agreed, Veidt has been the bright spot of this show. Like I said before, I liked this show while I was watching episode 1. As soon as he showed up, my like of this show like doubled. I'm such a fan of the sci-fi, just over-the-top, bizarre stuff we see with his character. So we kind of jumped around a bit with this episode. I'll probably do the more detailed beginning to end recap of this later in the week. We can keep this focused on kind of the bigger stuff that happened this episode. But jumping ahead, leaving Veidt for a minute, if we go back to let's go back to Looking Glass towards the end of the episode. So Looking Glass is sitting back in the FBI headquarters, and Angela asks him if he got any news on the pills. He gives her kind of a non-answer, asks if anything is true. He's rage not squid pro quo. I was a big fan of that. That is one of the things I wrote down here to talk about during the full recap. I'm a big pun fan. Brandon asks, is Redford still president? Yes, Robert Redford has been president since, 1995? So it was revealed. I don't know if this was revealed in the context of the show. It may have been through some of the supplemental material, but I know that Damon Lindelof talked about this in one of the interviews coming up to the show. But Richard Nixon got rid of term limits before the end of his term, which has allowed Robert Redford to be president for a couple of decades now, which is a little interesting piece of world building. And I do believe that Robert Redford, the actor in the real world, has been cast in that role. So I think at some point we'll see a real Robert Redford appearance, which should be pretty interesting. So back in the FBI headquarters, Looking Glass gives the non-answer to Angela, who's looking for information on those pills. He basically asks, is anything true? Just tell me, is anything true? Angela comes over and explains everything. She explains that she got those pills from her grandfather, explains that her grandfather was at the tree where Judd was killed, and that she did cover it up. In the foreground of the camera, we see the cactus, just like Josh said. Check your cacti and aloe plants. You never know. And in this case, we know that cactus is bugged by Laurie or the Silk Spectre. And in a moment after Angela reveals all of that, Looking Glass looks up at her and says, I'm sorry, which is really sort of a pathetic moment. Like I said, I have felt bad for Looking Glass this whole episode, the way that he is just taken advantage of. Everything he does in this episode is in service of somebody that's using him. Maybe the only exception to that is when he was in the support group, where he does take the lead. He does take some control. He's the one doing the talking. And even in that situation, in what should be a safe space, he's being taken advantage of, because that is where the blonde woman goes to lure him into the 7th Cavalry's trap. So by this point in the episode, I'm feeling so bad for him. And then he looks up and says, I'm sorry, and potentially loses the closest thing he had to a friend in an episode where he literally says out loud, I don't have any friends. So just a heartbreaking moment. And then moments later, Laurie comes out and arrests Angela. So Looking Glass goes back home. He's kind of out of sorts. He picks up the newly delivered extra dimensional security box, the EDS box, throws it in the trash, and you're like, hell yeah, Looking Glass, finally taking control of your life, finally freeing yourself of the paranoia. but we were celebrating too soon because he turns around and grabs the box out of the trash. And it seems like he's not quite ready to totally give up on that paranoia. And then matters get worse when a van shows up. A bunch of the 7th Cavalry jump out with their rifles, and they go with the rifles cocked into the Looking Glass's house. So Josh in the chat, I find it unlikely that Angela would say all of that to him at his desk as opposed to her car, but they established her urgency, so that's fine. Do you think Laurie and Angela will work together? I think this is going to be one of those, they're fighting each other for a couple of episodes, and then whatever this plan is that is potentially world ending, if it's on the level of that squid, the urgency on that plan is going to go up, and Laurie's going to see that Will is behind the plan or is somehow heavily involved. How do you get to Will? You've got to use Angela. So I think they're going to be forced into a situation where Laurie has to work with Angela so she can get to Will, or somehow whatever they need to do to stop Will or to attempt to stop Will. Rage Not, do you think Looking Glass could survive the home invasion? So here's what I think about that. Why are they invading his home, right? They're working with Looking Glass. He's doing what they wanted. He took Angela out of commission. Well, the fact of the matter is, it seems like the only reason they went to Looking Glass is because they needed him to take Angela out of commission. He's now done that, so I assume he's now not only useless to them, but he's now a major threat to them. Looking Glass has been let in on a huge secret that, if released, will cause a lot of problems. So they don't need any more. He now has a big secret in his head, so they're probably going to kill him. I don't think they're just going to intimidate him in any way. Now, me as a viewer watching the show, if I can piece that together, I believe Looking Glass is a pretty smart guy, so I'm hoping he was also able to piece that together. So I'm crossing my fingers that he was prepared for this. He knows they're coming. He set a trap, or he's going to hide out somewhere. I think the only shot he has at surviving this is if he prepared for it in advance. I don't think this is one of those situations where he gets cornered, caught off guard, and can fight his way through. I think there were 5 or 6 people coming after him. So I think that's really his only hope. And he is a super paranoid guy, so hopefully, hey, maybe he's actually booby-trapped his home, not even knowing about this specific situation, but maybe just in general, he's so paranoid that he's always ready for some kind of an attack. That's my hope. Josh says, Laurie cracks me up. Noah Hawley, arguably underutilized Jean Smart's talents on Legion, so it's good to see her on this show killing it. Maybe the cocked guns are used more as a warning. If you could elaborate what you mean by used as a warning, I'm curious about that. Who are they warning? I guess in the chat, do you agree with me that they're going there specifically to take out Looking Glass? Are they going to kill him, or do you think that they're going to intimidate for some reason? Do they have more of a use for him than just taking Angela out of commission for a few days? Curious to hear what y'all think in the chat. But don't go running your mouth or getting cold feet now. Josh, you got to elaborate. I'm not sure if you're quoting the show or are you telling me not to run my mouth? We'll see. But that kind of brings us to the end of the episode there. There's probably more details that I'll go through in the full recap. But my overall thoughts on the episode, I think we hit a lot of the highlights there. But going into this show, this episode, I've been liking the last few episodes mainly as a mystery. I was just intrigued to see what happens next. But for me, Watchmen hasn't primarily, when I say, I mean the graphic novel, to me, it wasn't primarily a mystery. There was an element of mystery, but I also cared about the characters. I was emotionally involved in the characters. There was also the global threat. There was that big global threat that loomed over everything in that comic. And I feel like this show is primarily a mystery, and now those other things are starting to come into play. This was the first episode where I really felt emotionally involved, Maybe the only exception to that is when Laurie was talking to Dr. Manhattan in episode 3, and she kind of breaks down at the end of the episode. That really worked for me. And then because I got more emotionally involved this episode, the cliffhanger here is probably the first time I've felt real danger on this show. That's my tech guy in the corner there. He's messing with the keyboard. I have a real sense of danger. I'm worried about Wade. I don't know what's going to happen the next episode. Half of me thought we were going to see him die this episode. So I see that as a very real possibility. So in the chat, Sean says, no way Wade knows that they plan to kill him. No way, Wade. And you corrected yourself. Didn't know, I think is what you're saying. And I agree with you. He's super paranoid. He's got to know how the world works, that if you know something you shouldn't know and you can't see any reason you're useful to the people who know, you've got to think you've got a big target on your back. Brandon, he can tell when people are lying. He knew the senator was gonna have to kill him. Very good point. You're all making me feel better, because as much as I wanted to believe Wade was going to be able to get out of this one, I was kind of clinging to the hope. Maybe he knows they're coming, and I feel like you're all validating that theory. So I think there is hope for Wade. Josh, a warning to Wade. Okay, so when you're talking about the gun being cocked, you're saying you think that may have been a warning to Wade not to betray them. I'm not sure if I 100% agree with you there. I could see them using it as an intimidation tactic, but I think they would do that once they're in the house in front of him. Cock the gun, tell him, hey, we really mean business. We'll kill you if we have to. Unless they're thinking he can hear them through the door, in which case it's, hey, we're outside. We have guns. Don't try anything funny. Sean, I feel like he knew they would kill him after. Yeah. The more we talk about it here, the more I'm convinced that Looking Glass, just from his general paranoia, his ability to tell when people are lying, he was staring face to face with the senator. So yes, I do think that he knows that they were going to come kill him. Doesn't guarantee his safety, but it gives him a fighting chance. So I think those are probably my overall thoughts on the episode. I think I've got other things to say in kind of the details of it. I'll go through those in my longer form recap of the episode later in the week. But like I've said a few times, to me, this was probably my favorite episode of Watchmen so far. It started to grow from just a mystery. We've got that overwhelming threat that's looming in the background. I've become more emotionally involved in the show. I did really like Laurie in episode 3. She's kind of dipped into the background the last couple of episodes. So I hope that in the next episode, she does come more to the forefront. Josh in the chat, I like what Brandon said about the senator lying. If the episodes can balance micro character moments that are grounded in Tulsa drama with macro Veidt versus Dr. Manhattan, that would be cool. Agreed. It's been every time the Veidt scenes come up, part of me just marvels at the fact that this is in the same show as a very grounded Tulsa racists versus African American community plot. It just feels like two totally different plots that are slowly starting to merge. And, we've all been talking about Dr. Manhattan, and I feel like it's really interesting how he has not really been overtly involved in anything yet. I think a lot of people are theorizing that he's been a part of the show and that we just don't know it yet. Maybe he is one of the characters. Maybe Will is Dr. Manhattan. I saw some people theorizing that maybe Cal is Dr. Manhattan. And the writers of the show, Damon Lindelof, they know that we're doing this. They knew that we were going to do this because in one of the scenes we see Panda and Red Scare debating that Dr. Manhattan and Hooded Justice might be the same person in American Hero Story. So they were kind of a conduit for viewers in this episode, sort of making fun of the kind of theorizing that we're all doing on a week-to-week basis. So love this episode. Really enjoying the show so far. It feels like we've kind of hit the gas. We're zooming towards whatever larger plot looms, figuring out what the Millennium Clock is all about, figuring out what is going on with Veidt, and I hope we don't slow down. I think there's only 4 episodes left in the season, So I got to imagine we're not slowing down anytime soon. Josh in the chat says he'll be on the show, but they have to be smart not to overuse him. There's not tension when God's always in the room. Agreed. I do think he's going to have I think he's going to be used in a small role, sparingly, but we'll see. I mean, I wouldn't mind him being more prominently featured. In the graphic novel, he was a key character. He was featured throughout, and he was super interesting. And I think the way they got away with avoiding what you're talking about, right? The tension goes away if God's there, is they made God not care. Dr. Manhattan didn't want to get involved in everything that was going on. So the fact that he was around really didn't matter because you weren't going to have the Deus Ex Machina moment. Dr. Manhattan didn't jump in to stop Ozymandias. So curious to see what kind of role he plays here. Hopefully we find out in the next couple of weeks. But anyway, unless anybody else has any crazy theories they want to share in the chat or any final thoughts about this episode, I think we can close it out there. So, like I said, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like button, or as Rage Not likes to say, smash the like button, subscribe to this channel, and hit the little bell icon to make sure you get notifications whenever we do more videos like this one. And you're especially going to want to hit that bell icon because more and more of our videos are being done through the live stream format. So you want to get notified when we go live. So like Josh, like Sean, like Brandon, like Rage Not, you can be a part of the conversation, be a part of the One Take family. You're all awesome. But once you're part of the One Take family, you're just ever so slightly, just a little bit more awesome. So thank you all for watching, and keep an eye out for that longer form recap of the entire episode that'll be coming later in the week. Thanks for watching. And now, Tech Guy, how do I end the live stream? There we go. Finish stream.